Uh, Hi, I'm Greg.
Hi, I'm Greg.
So Greg, what's your association with Fitzroy?
I live around here, lived in the inner city for most of the last 10 years, but like a lot of renters, and there are a lot of renters in this area, I move around a fair bit from house to house, so my latest place I've been there 2 years.
Yeah. And where did you live before Fitzroy?
Over the back of Lygon Street, up on Park Street, Seacombe Street, and I grew up in Glen Waverley.
Glen Waverley?
Well, I didn't grow up till I left Glen Waverley, but...
Yeah. And would you say that, with your experience of other Melbourne suburbs, that Fitzroy has its own particular identity or character?
Yeah. It's a nice compact place and it's a good mix. Whereas Glen Waverley, everything's miles apart and they're all of one demographic.
Yeah. So it's the diversity?
Yeah. And that's a tension that's going on at the moment. You've got the area being gentrified. Well, it's been gentrified a while, but it's being gentrified again. And you've still got that side by side with migrants who've lived here since the war, and for that matter, homeless people living in fourth world conditions.
Yeah.
And in Glen Waverley, you'd never see those people. But in here, it's in your face. How people react to it is the interesting part.
And how do you think people in Fitzroy react to this?
Well, I mean, not to be too sort of cliche about it, but people tend to move into this area for the things that attracted them to the area, maybe as a visitor, like access to restaurants and clubs and entertainment and all the things they like doing.
Yeah.
But when you move in, you start to get a few of the negatives as well. I mean, I was kept awake for the first 6 weeks that I moved into my place, which is right on Smith Street, right on a retail street, main thoroughfare. For the first 6 weeks, I thought I was going to go mad due to sleep deprivation.
Yeah.
So noise is the sort of thing where you've got to start to accept a new standard when you move to a new area.
Yeah. So was this street noise or?
Oh, that was street noise and people.
People, yeah.
And I used to be one of those drunks frolicking home at 3 in the morning from the club.
Yeah.
You know, and now they keep me awake, so there's not much I can say about it. Trams cause my TV reception to frizz out every time they come past, but you can't say much about it when you move there knowing there'd be a tram every 5 minutes and you could jump on it and be straight into the city, so got to take the good with the bad.
Yeah. So what sort of specific things do you think add to Fitzroy's character, like individuals or?
Well, it's interesting. My interest in the area now, I guess my big interest is that I'm a politician. I'm running for local council.
Yeah.
And I've already been out and door-knocked a good chunk of the electorate.
Yeah.
And it's interesting talking to people about the same sorts of things.
Yeah.
To get the conversation going, I ask them, well, do you like this area? Yeah. And they all say, yeah, I like this area. People are here by choice, you know. But one guy started talking to me about how I should be standing up for Fitzroy, the suburb, not necessarily the people that are in it. I mean, an area that's had such big waves of such different groups of people coming through.
Yeah.
It's two different questions, isn't it?
Yeah.
The people who live here now, are they Fitzroy, or is it Fitzroy, the physical place?
Yeah. Yeah. So you've spoken to lots of people that own houses here and people that rent here?
Yeah, well, about half are renters and half are owners.
Yeah. And
the owners who are there for the long haul, they've lived there 10 years and they're going to be living there for another 10 years.
Yeah.
They're very touchy about keeping the neighbourhood character more or less as it is when they came in. Yeah. And fair enough, because if you buy a house, you're buying a package deal which includes your footpath, your suburb, and the street in front of you, and that's what you wanted. If it starts to change, you don't like it too much.
Yeah.
If you're a renter, you're not so engaged with council issues necessarily, the roads, rates and rubbish sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, you know, if things got too bad, you could always move.
Yeah.
So those two groups make quite a difference. And when you turn up to someone's door and knock on the door, you don't know who you're going to get.
Yeah.
And so you're going to be in a very different conversation depending on which one it is.
So the owners, do you think that they worry about things like new bars or noise levels, people being drunk in the street, or
Yeah, all those issues. But I mean, local government can't do all those things, but local government can do a lot more than what it's doing now. They can do a lot more on general cleanliness, That's the biggest thing, street cleaning,
Yeah. Yeah.
And the rubbish, I see the rubbish is being thrown around by people coming back from the pubs, smashing stubbies,
Yeah.
Local council could make a big difference to people's lives just by cleaning up the place a little bit more. What they can't do is start influencing through their direct powers people, right? That people want them to pass laws saying no drunks allowed, They want them to do things like take the street furniture away in Smith Street so that drunks won't sit on, or what they're really talking about is poor people won't come and sit there and stay there all day and use the street as their lounge room.
Yeah.
But the street over the millennia has been a living part of the city. People did commerce right there in the street.
Yeah.
Plays were very often set with a street scene.
Yeah.
Returning armies would have come back and marched right through the whole town. And so the street's a living part of our community. And in Glen Waverley, you just want it clean, tidy. It's a place you drive through on the way to your garage. But in Fitzroy, street life is both the attraction and the problem that people are trying to manage.
Yeah. Do you think that's got something to do with houses being smaller here?
Yeah.
People having much more outside existence?
Yeah. I mean, you can give people a map and ask them to draw which is their area, which do they see as their own space in which they operate.
Yeah.
And on busy streets, you'll find that people don't draw any of the street or the footpath, or very often even their own front yard or their front room, when they've been driven back into the back room by the noise of cars and trucks. Whereas in an area like this, you'd hope that people would say the street and the park and the shop down the corner where I buy stuff is all part of their personal operating space.
Yeah.
It's also been shown that people who live in quiet streets have more friends, have more acquaintances amongst their neighbours than in a. You can measure it in a street with thousands of cars and trucks racing up. People would report they only have 0.8 of a friend on average in their street.
Yeah. I suppose that's the unique thing about this area is most of the streets are blocked off.
Yeah.
You don't get trucks.
Yeah. Well, you do get a few people hammering down some of the back streets.
Yeah.
And that's something I'd like to stop as a politician, slow down those speeds, make that street space somewhere where kids can kick the footy and play cricket and stuff.
Yeah. So you think that there are things that other areas of Melbourne could learn from Fitzroy?
Yeah. Well, look, people are voting with their feet, aren't they?
Yeah.
I mean, they're coming to this area. The prices of houses are skyrocketing.
Yeah.
People don't want what they can get anywhere in the suburbs. They want what's fairly unique.
Yeah.
The main thing is to make sure that they don't destroy the very thing that they're after by coming here.
And do you think that uniqueness has something to do with locality, wanting a community, wanting to have friends in a close geographical area?
Well, I guess there'd be a hierarchy of things, and you'd have to say the physical layout of the place, first of all, creates a community.
Yeah.
And then you'd go up through various levels of sociological and personal and so forth. So yeah, there's plenty of people who've got something to say about, the old Fitzroy, the new Fitzroy, where it's going to the dogs, they've probably been saying it for a very long time. And this is the first suburb of Melbourne after people moved out of the initial first settlement grid. So I suppose the issue of the suburbs has been debated here for a long time.
Yeah. So, what do you understand about globalisation? Or is there anything that you could tell us how you see globalisation? impacting upon the local
Yeah.
areas
Well,
like Fitzroy.
Yes, I'm a local candidate for the Green Party,
Yep.
and the Green Party is probably the world's first globalised political party. The mayor of Dublin was a Green.
Yeah.
The mayor of Rome was until recently a Green. The mayor of Dunedin in New Zealand was elected as a Green Party person. Governors in Mexico and Brazil. I think the mayor of Sao Paulo is a Green.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm part of a sort of a network of people who came up under the slogan "Think Global, Act Local." And I can tell you from meeting with those people and reading their stuff, they're all talking about the exact same things, even though they're spread all over the planet.
Mm.
And so the sort of solutions and the ideas that the Greens are putting forward, it's not like we set up branch offices everywhere. I mean, this thing just arose spontaneously as a natural reaction to the kind of insanity that's going on in the world. And wherever you go, you'll hear people, people from Eastern Europe now in broken English saying the exact same things, that people would be expressing the same values and the same ideals as people would be saying right here in Fitzroy. So it's just absolutely amazing to be part of that. And to be part of a political movement that's not going to be picked off one by global corporations, who would quite happily turn this into the, Fitzroy theme park if they thought there was $1 in it. And if there wasn't $1 in it, they'd pack it up and do it in some other place on the other side of the planet. The Greens are probably the first force and the biggest new political force coming out at the beginning of this century, just like the Labour movement were at the beginning of the last century, who've got a vision for positive globalisation and are doing it right here, right now, at the very much local, my suburb level.
So how do the Greens network on a global scale? How do you keep in contact with people in Sao Paulo?
Yep.
People in
Yep.
other parts of the world?
Yeah. Well, people travel around from time to time, but really we were the early adopters of the internet.
Yeah.
I mean, the world discovered the internet in '95. Well, we were using email in 1990 to keep in touch with that sort of thing and to coordinate. And it's still a very big force, as you know, for any activist movement. But it's also, I mean, you just need that encouragement of knowing that, you're not the only person in the world who's dealing with that problem.
Yeah.
Because there's an ability for the media and for corporations to sort of make people think they're the only one that's pissed off about air pollution, for example. Like, I think the air's terrible, but I think it's just me, and I've got the chairman of the EPA saying, no, actually our air's really good. When people think they're the only one, then they start to think, well, maybe I'm insane, and then they get very depressed, and they don't. And what we know is that they don't speak out, because they just think they're this lone individual.
Yeah.
As soon as you start putting people in touch with each other, and they realise, hey, we're all suffering from air pollution. My kid's got asthma, your kid's got asthma. Now that might happen through a public meeting or some big political activity, but it might just happen because there is some point, some little place in your local environs that it just causes you to stop and interact with other people in your suburb. It might be the corner shop, or it might be some park or something, So that public space is incredibly important in terms of actually providing a venue where people can spontaneously, I guess, interact, rather than just locking themselves in their little boxes, jumping in their car every morning, which is another little box, and driving off to their widely dispersed jobs every morning.
Yeah. So I suppose that's one of the big threats in globalisation, that public spaces are becoming quite private through through consumption.
Well, I mean, that's right. I mean, they privatised all the big utilities and the public-owned airlines and all that sort of stuff, and people thought that was dreadful and the end of the world. But I don't think privatisation's even started really. I mean, by winding down public transport and replacing it with motorised transport, you are essentially privatising the transport system, aren't you? And it means that people no longer interact anymore on public transport spontaneously. They now lock themselves in boxes, listen to the radio, and deal with each other as hostiles, really, when they're on the road. If you drive people out of parks or out of even public spaces like footpaths by shrinking those back, every bit of roadworks around here where there's a conflict between more lanes of cars, bicycles, trams and pedestrians, what do you think happens? More road space, less pedestrian space. So you're literally pushing people right out of any kind of public space and back into their lounge rooms where they sit, watch cable TV and are told what to buy next.
Yeah. So what particular solutions do you think that a small community like Fitzroy could have towards globalisation?
Well, there's some real positive things that a local community can do if it takes for itself the power that it already has, and works to empower itself. And not only that, but these global problems look pretty hard when you look at them from the top down. When you see how many different tools are in your hands at the local level, they actually start to look pretty easy. I mean, take the greenhouse effect, for example. Basically, in terms of the average person, half their emissions come from energy use around the house and workplace, and the other half come from transport. Well, this is an area where we have a lot of control in Fitzroy if we want to. We can make it bicycle friendly. We can keep making it even more public transport friendly than it is and lobby for better public transport. We can keep outside cars out of the area and make it so that people can sell their second car, which will save them money, which will help out low-income people if they don't need a car. Two-car family used to be a status symbol. Now it's a necessity to get everybody to the things they need to do. We can take control of local transport and make it more people-friendly. The council itself, look, most councils spend about $1 million a year on electricity. They could save half that. It's all waste. Once you start looking for it, you can find it. But if they could share those same sorts of skills and abilities with local residents, particularly the low-income places, okay? Because the low-income places are cold, damp, drafty, and still use a lot of energy, okay? Whereas wealthy people tend to have good insulation, efficient heaters, efficient appliances. So the local council could be helping out low-income people by insulating and retrofitting and draft stopping their houses, and you'd be achieving a social justice aim at the same time as a big picture environmental one. That might sound like a small and fairly daggy thing, but cities all over the world are doing this, and when you get together with them, you realise how many exciting things are happening.
And how do you see Fitzroy as, what solutions do you see in that area like Fitzroy preserving its local character?
That's actually the really hard one, because market forces are very much determining housing and property development in this area, and you'd be pretty hard pressed to try and hold back that tide, you know. It's been gentrified before and it's being gentrified now, and by forcing out low-income people, what we're really doing is pushing them out into the suburbs where there's no transport, no services. You can get a Hungry Jack's burger, but you won't be able to get kids minded. You'll have to travel a long way to access basic social services. The only way I can see it, I can't see any one council being able to start implementing rent controls by itself, because they just don't have the power to do it. They'd be rolled over by state and federal governments. But I think through something like social housing, where it's kept at a not-for-profit level, and it is essentially with an aim of creating low-income housing,
But
we
by social housing?
Yeah, through a social housing cooperative type thing, whether it's run by local governments, not-for-profits, or some level of state government. But I mean, state government doesn't even believe in public housing anymore, you know. They'd much rather get rid of it all and redevelop it, take the money onto the balance sheet, and then give people vouchers and let them try and survive in the private rental market and just give them income support to do it. They don't really believe in public housing. They don't even believe in government anymore. You know, that's the tragedy of it, is we've got a generation of politicians coming in now who don't even want to be in government. They want to be in power, but they don't want to be in government. They see their job as like the receivers, to come in and wind it all up and get rid of it all and push it all out to market forces, you know. But I think they've overstepped the mark. The community actually wants government more than ever. They want intervention more than ever across a whole range of areas: health, environment, social justice. People, as much as ever, want government to solve problems, and the tide's turning against that school of thought, the sort of Tony Blair third way kind of, you know, we've got all these market-based solutions to all these problems. The tide's turning against that sort of politician, really, as they're coming into the highest levels of power, with a Kim Beazley or whatever. And the Greens' tide is rising fairly inexorably at the moment.
So you see, do you see the protest movements like the S11 or S1? You see that as part of that tide?
Absolutely.
Types of companies?
Absolutely. I mean, activists are probably more empowered in some ways than they ever have been. I think there was a big gap there between the baby boomers who protested against Vietnam, got very excited that they were creating a revolution, and they did create a social revolution. And then, you know, saw it all swept away with the dismissal or whatever it was, you know. I mean, I think to the younger crew of activists, the idea that a democratically elected government got overthrown with US involvement is a bit of a yawn, really. But most of the sort of, you know, Don-chip Democrats that are still around haven't quite recovered from the dismissal yet. The younger crew are much more pragmatic, much more activist, much more into empowerment. There's been a whole wave of empowerments that have gone on since then: gay rights, feminist. These people not so much take them for granted, but actually use them as a starting point in their work. And you know, what I see with S11 and other movements that are going on is that they've thrown the hippie school rulebook out the window. You know, we're not scared of technology. We'll use technology. You know, we don't have to adopt those old style forms like, you know, marching rallies or whatever, when we can run the whole thing in cyberspace, you know.
Okay, yeah.
No, I'm good.
So what do you think about how things like Kennett's reforms, where you closed down Fitzroy Primary School and closed down the local council, how do you think that affected Fitzroy as a local democracy?
Well, I mean, obviously the great benefits that were promised just haven't appeared at all. I mean, that's the problem with having someone who's got a pocket calculator where his brain ought to be in such a position of power. People in this area, there were three councils amalgamated together: Fitzroy, Collingwood and Richmond, and they all had their very own strong characters beforehand, and all that has been washed out and homogenised under the new council, which is now based down Richmond, a long way away if you need to go down there and pay a bill, and you either haven't got transport to get there, or you haven't got time. And that would be the two groups in this area: the time poor and the you know, financially poor. One of the things that happened was that, of course, they had three big old town halls.
Yeah.
And this one, the Fitzroy Town Hall, got closed down everything got sucked back to Richmond Town Hall. That was in '96, and they're still fighting over what to do with it. At the moment, it's more or less abandoned.
Yeah.
It needs major works. It's getting buried under pigeon poop, and it's just a political football that's going back and forth.
Yeah.
But I mean, you know, my view is that we need these public spaces, these public places for public forums more than ever. You know, I was in East Timor in February, and I remember some expat people, the UN guys, saying, you know, we asked these East Timorese people what they wanted in this village, and they said we wanted a town hall. Like, oh my God, you know, these crazy people don't know what's good for them. You know, they didn't want education, they didn't want medicine, they didn't want food. They wanted a town hall. And my response was, well, maybe you should look a little bit behind that and see what it is that this town hall actually represents for them, you know. Probably been looking after themselves and their basic needs for a long time, but a place for them to get together and meet and do all sorts of interactions that we can't even imagine as outsiders. Could have been one of the things they saw as the most crucial to their livelihood. So you come back to Melbourne, opposite end of the spectrum, and here you see that the town hall's, you know, virtually boarded up and abandoned. It's a big priority to me to get that open, get it back as a public space. There's no doubt they could find a tenant if they wanted to just outsource it to a, you know, boutique hotel or a catering company or something. Probably have wedding receptions in there or something. But if Fitzroy's future, if Fitzroy's survival depends on empowerment, people working together, then they're going to need some sort of physical space to do that in. Pretty obvious that town hall's got to be, you know, the most logical place. So let's just get the damn thing open. Now let's bite the bullet, spend the money, so stop the roof leaking, clean it up, wiring, fire protection, and get some people back in there.
What sort of ideas do you have for its use?
Well, you see, there's been a lot of ideas thrown around, from arts to community to finding some not-for-profit groups offering space for them. I like all those. It should be up to people to decide. But my personal priority is that it's a space for people to interact. I wouldn't even want to see one group or one interest group at the expense of others necessarily take over and dominate. But the decision's being made purely on economic terms, I can tell you. It's being made on net present value and internal rate of return. Provided we keep the town hall open, make it cheap, make it free for that matter. Don't make everything a user pays. Then there's a lot of opportunity for the other spaces in and around it to be used. I mean, we've got the local library underneath it now, right? And I mean, here's another issue that's going on in the world at the moment is the information rich and the information poor. Okay. People promised with the internet that everybody would be able to get everything and it'd be so good for poor people, but in fact it's disadvantaged them now, because companies and probably local councils are moving to, you know, internet online billing, and banks, and eventually they're going to start punishing you quite heavily if you don't use the internet channel. So you've opened up a new area of disadvantage, the internet accessible and those who don't. Well, down and underneath there in the library, they've got all these internet terminals that seem to get a pretty good hammering from the local kids. Again, we could redress the imbalance between rich and poor as a council just by offering free internet access to people through the library, which is right there in the town hall.
So what do you think of Beasley's idea of
The Knowledge Nation?
Knowledge Nation of internet for everyone?
Yeah, I think his thing was a university on the internet, you know.
Yeah.
I just can't see it happening.
So this
It's an El Cheapo response to a guy who really doesn't want to spend money.
So
Really?
The way the internet is being used is simply efficiency, speed, and
That's right.
further alienate people
He can afford it.
community.
He can afford everybody to have a free university education. I mean, let's face it, this is a generation of politicians who all got a free university education, right? I mean, I don't know exactly, but they're all around about 70s. They would have been at uni, you know, they would have benefited 70s to early 80s from golf, right?
Yeah.
Now they're here telling us that oh, so that just can't be afforded anymore, you know, everything's got to be years of pays. And, you know, for those of you who we know are just going to miss out, well, you can go and do your course on the internet, you know. I mean, how pathetic. All he needs to do is build a few less Navy frigates and a few less submarines that don't work, and he's got all the money he needs. But he's a warmonger. I mean, Bomber Beasley, you know, that's his thing. That's his passion, is defence. And he comes from the school that says, you know, too much defence is not enough. Well, there are some threats to Australia, but they're environmental, and they're social, and they're to do with global capital. They're not to do with being invaded. And submarines, in any case, aren't part of any kind of self-defence strategy. So, you know, why don't they get serious about the real dangers and the real threats to Australia, and start applying the sort of money that they put over there? 10 billion now, defence budget, it's now surpassed the higher ed budget on the federal balance sheet. And why don't they get serious?
I want to